Evolutionary algorithms have been and still are intensively researched and used in musical meta-creation. In fact, most musical creative tasks one can think of have been tackled using evolutionary computation in one way or another. Systems have been developed that evolve new musical compositions, and almost every aspect of music composition has been addressed, including melodies, rhythm, chord progressions, etc. Systems have also been deployed to evolve interpretations of existing compositions. Besides composition and interpretation-related tasks, operations on symbolic representation, audio application in the area of sound synthesis and sound design have also been inquired. We will look at examples of all of these in this lesson, but like for other systems involving visible forms, we will start by reviewing systems based on interactive genetic algorithms. GenJam, which stands for Genetic Jammer, was likely the first musical agent powered by evolutionary computation. Initially developed in 1993 by Al Biles, GenJam is an interactive genetic algorithm that learns to improvise jazz solos. It has played with its creator all around the world and has gotten a fair bit of attention. In a jazz jam session, the soloist typically either plays full solo alone or will trade solos by alternating with another player, typically every 4, 8, or 16 bars. Like a regular jazz soloist, GenJam knows the chord progression and the tempo of the songs. In order to improvise jazz solos, GenJam co-evolves two populations of melodic ideas. One is a population of measures with 64 individuals. The other is a population of phrases with 48 individuals. A chromosome in the measure population is made of 8 genes that each map to an 8th notes. Each gene in a measure is encoded by 4 bits, with values 0 for rest, 15 for being a hold, and values between 1 and 14 being the notes events that are mapped to an actual MIDI note through a set of scales that correspond to the chord being played during that measure. Since the encoding is relative to the scale associated with the current chord, GenJam cannot play a wrong note. A phrase is made of 4 measures, each encoded by 6 bits. Each chromosome in both populations is associated with a manually determined fitness value. When training falls, GenJam simply records the human player, and during the last bit, it applies mutation operators to this recording to generate its answers. What is original about GenJam is that instead of the traditional random mutation, the mutation operators are musically meaningful. The measure mutations operate at the note level and include transposition, rotation, sorting, inversion, retrograding, etc., while the phrase mutation operates at the measure pointer level and includes reversing, rotation, sequencing, and operators that try to combine highly fit measures while trying to ensure the genetic diversity of the population. GenJam has 3 modes: learning, breeding, and demo. In the learning mode, a human listener gives real-time fitness scores to GenJam musical phrases. In the breeding mode, GenJam implements genetic operators on the population of existing musical phrases to generate new ones. In the demo mode, GenJam improvises on a jazz tune using the chord progression file of that tune. Here is an excerpt of the system training falls with its author. In this excerpt, the system was simply trading solos, but there are 2 other types of interaction supported by GenJam. The second type of interaction is an intelligent echo. GenJam maintains a buffer where it stores the notes the human is playing. After a delay, it then starts to play that buffer back while continuing to record new notes. The delayed material is remapped to fit the current chords, which makes it sound appropriately different and, according to Biles, provide a unique experience of reflective improvisation as the performer plays with a variation of himself and what he played in the past. With the third type of interaction, Gen Jam tries to evolve the population of measures in the direction of the human's playing. Gen Jam uses the human's solo to build a population of measures chromosomes. It then applies mutations and crossovers to mix these measures with the content of the population. It chooses the crossovers to make the transition as smooth as possible. This evolves a solo that is a genetic descendant of the human's performance and the current population of Gen Jam. The system can be initialized using a dedicated fractal-based initialization system that Biles developed, or with any other existing solo performances on the given song. Overall, the system is simple and is reminiscent of the continuator, although it was developed more than a decade before. Some have criticized it for using evolutionary computation only tangentially, since the notion of generations is not central to the system. The author's design philosophy is geared toward a simple and robust system, and he notes that Gen Jam is more pleasurable to play with than most musicians he has shared a stage with. Most recently, Darwin Tunes is a project by researcher Bob McCallum and Armand Leroy at Imperial College London. This web-based project allows its user to generate electronic music loops. The user chooses pairs of loops in a population of 8 loops. The pairs reproduce sexually and populate the next generation of musical loops with hybrids and variations. The system encourages collaborative evolution and is gamified in that users get points whenever other users select their loops to be parents of their own productions. Starting with 100 random loops, the researcher found that for the first 500 or 600 generations, the aesthetic quality of the loops improved dramatically. After that, they reach a stable equilibrium. This is the loop that I evolved in about 15 minutes working with the system. In contemporary electronic music, the Swedish composer Pal Dastel developed Mutasynths in 2001. The system evolves parameters for digital modular synthesizer sound settings, or patches. In doing so, the user evolves both the sound textures and the composition and basic sequencing. The system represents the parameters of a given patch as a bit string and uses standard interactive genetic algorithm. The screen capture shows the interface which displays the 9 individuals of the current population. Here are examples of the type of patches the system can consider and evolve parameters for. The users can select which parameters of the system to evolve. They can manipulate mutation and crossover probabilities, and they can load or save genomes. Users can also manually apply one of the 4 genetic operators. Mutasynth is equipped with the usual crossover and mutation operators, as well as an insemination operator that controls how much of each parent is injected into their offspring. An interpolation operator allows to set the position of the offsprings on the line between the parents in the parameter space. The user can also manipulate the parameters of a given patch manually in the sound engine. The system was presented as an installation, and electronic music composition were evolved by the author and the audience alike. Mutasynths later led to the patch mutator in the Nord modular G2 synthesizer. This was a commercial application of the system. Here is an excerpt of a piece generated by the author using the system. Of course, automatic fitness functions have also been used for music and sound design. Besides interactive fitness functions, a vast variety of automatic fitness functions have been developed for the evolution of musical sequences. All sorts of mathematical formulas have been proposed to rate a particular sequence. In what is sometimes called rule-based fitness function, individuals are evaluated against a set of musical rules, templates, or constraints. These can be specific to a particular musical style, or they can be more generic, music theory-based rules regarding intervals, tone centers, and compliance to key and meter. For example, the 1994 system Vox Populi by Moroni and colleagues involves populations of chords of 4 notes. Each note is represented as a 7-bit digital binary string. The genotype of a chord therefore consists of a string of 28 bits. Here is an example of such a string. The generic operation of crossovers and mutations are applied to these strings in order to produce new generations of the population. The fitness function is based on 3 criteria: melodic fitness, harmonic fitness, and voice range fitness. The melodic fitness compares the notes of the chord to a reference value provided by the user. The harmonic fitness evaluates the consonance of the chord. And the voice range fitness measures whether the notes of the chords are within a certain range specified by the user. In 1998, Papadopoulos and Wiggins followed a similar procedure to evolve jazz melodies on chord progressions, while McIntyre did exactly the reverse, evolving harmonies for a given melody. Altogether, most musical tasks one can think of have been looked at using analytical automatic fitness functions or rule-based fitness functions. The results are varied in quality and constitute a good way to study the music theoretical aspects used to formulate the fitness function. Many composers and researchers have noted that the evolutionary process itself is reminiscent of the manual composition process. Generating several musical ideas, selecting some, iterating a number of times, and exploring variations is often the way human composers work. The idea of mutating a musical idea is reminiscent of the notion of development, which is pervasive in Western music. As we saw with Gen Jam already, using musically meaningful operators makes this type of exploratory creative process very relevant. Besides analytical fitness functions, data-driven or example-driven fitness functions can also be derived from existing pieces. A typical approach to do so is best explained in 3 steps. First, one defines a number of dimensions for the fitness function, all normalized to be scores between 0 and 1. These can be pitch variety, dissonance measures, contour directions, contour stability, rhythmic variety, rhythmic range, etc. One can even select more features than needed and run a feature selection algorithm to keep only the most relevant features for the task at hand. This feature selection algorithm is beyond the scope of this class, though. Secondly, the user selects a corpus of existing pieces and calculates statistics, typically average and standard deviation, for the features selected in step 1. These values are then used as fitness goals. The corpus used to calculate these fitness goals can be a single piece of music or a collection of pieces, or it can be selected excerpts. The third step in the process is to define a distance or similarity measure that will compare the statistics of each individual to that of the corpus to determine how fit it is. This approach of using an existing corpus as a target is yet another way to implement some sort of style imitation. These data-driven approaches to automatic fitness have often been deployed in hybrid contexts where genetic algorithms are used in combination with other generative techniques. An example of such an approach is the style machine, developed by Metacreative Technologies. The style machine does corpus-based style imitation and is specifically conceived for electronic dance music, or EDM. It is implemented as a plugin for the popular digital audio workstation Ableton Live. It operates on symbolic corpora of electronic dance music transcriptions grouped into corpora ranging from early breakbeat music to modern house music. The style machine uses a variation of variable order Markov models to generate patterns for the various parts, and genetic algorithm to generate the structure of the song that puts parts and sequences of parts together. It generates the composition. It is up to the user to do the sound production, mixing, and make the composition sounds right with Ableton. It is worth noting that, in general, maybe surprisingly, the composition task, especially through style imitation, is actually simpler than the interpretation task. This is because playing a musical instrument makes use of the body, and the subtleties of musical expressivity during interpretation are not well understood and are very hard to replicate artificially. For this reason, the Style Machine focuses on electronic dance music, since it is a genre where most instruments are already operated by machines, such as synthesizers, drum machines, etc., which alleviates the interpretation problem. The Style Machine has been used in public shows on various occasions since 2012, whether in demonstrations, in concerts associated with conferences like the International Society for Musical Information Retrieval Conference or the International Symposium for Electronic Arts, as well as in various algo raves and clubbing events. An album produced by Arne Egelfeld with Awkward Strangers doing the production was released on the UK-based label Chord Punch in 2014. Chord Punch is specialized in machine-generated electronic dance music. It is also worth noticing that the soundtrack for this class was produced by me together with French composer Philippe Bertrand in the legendary Robonum music studio using Style Machine for the composition of the piece. Here are further examples of compositions by the Style Machine ranging from breakbeat to dance tempo. In order to manage several voices, Style Machine relies on a fixed setup that assumes a fixed number of tracks. It includes some tracks for rhythmic parts, a track for bass, 2 tracks of melodies, 2 tracks of chord progressions, etc. An innovation of the Style Machine is the possibility to learn a model using more than one corpus at a time. This multi-corpus approach allows the user to tap into the potential of combinatorial creativity and move from pure style imitation to style interpolation, style extrapolation, or style transformation. Style machines can also generate individual parts separately. For example, you might like a pattern except for its bass line, so you can simply decide to regenerate only the bass line, or maybe the rhythm, or any part that you wish until you're satisfied with the overall patterns across all the tracks. Once you're happy with a particular pattern, you can generate a full track structure from this multi-track pattern and start editing further using Ableton tools if necessary. These features, along with the accessible interface of the system, makes for a powerful computer-assisted composition tool within Ableton. Automatic fitness functions have also been used and applied in evolutionary sound design and sound synthesis. A popular use of genetic algorithm is in a creative task known as preset generation. Honor and colleagues have applied evolutionary computation to this preset generation task since the early 90s. As an example of multiple objective genetic algorithm for preset generation, let's look at PresetGen, a 2014 automatic preset generation system developed at the Meta Creation Lab. Given a target sound, which can be any short audio recording or sample, PresetGen will return a set of presets that correspond to the closest sounds possible to the target sound for the synthesizer at hand. The system has been evaluated on the OP1 synthesizer, developed by the Swedish company Teenage Engineering. Like most modern synthesizers, the OP1 has dozens of parameters organized in complex fashion. It has multiple sound engines, and switching from one engine to the other makes the fitness functions highly discontinuous. We counted 10 to the power of 78 possible settings in the OP1 synthesizers. Given that there are about 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the universe, this means that the search space of all the possible sounds the synthesizer can produce is extremely big. As a real-world example, PresetGen for the OP1 is a good case study to discuss the notion of fitness landscapes. In evolutionary computation, the fitness landscape is a multidimensional surface corresponding to the mapping from the genome to the fitness value, or fitness values in the case of multi-objective evolutionary computation. In general, the more a fitness landscape exhibits ruggedness and multiple peaks, the more difficult it is to find a global optimum versus a local one. Like real-world landscapes, a fitness landscape can vary considerably in shape from large flat regions of similarity, continuous rolling hills, sharp peaks, abrupt cliffs, etc. Different methods of measuring the fitness of the individuals will influence the fitness landscape. And so it is useful to visualize and compare the landscapes produced by various methods. We can also attempt to quantify the difficulty of a fitness landscape. One method of doing so is to check whether the fitness landscape is continuous or if it has sudden jumps and discontinuities. We call a fitness landscape multimodal if a small change in genome implies a big change in fitness. This occurs, for example, when we change one bit that codes for a synthesis engine versus another. In some ways, this means that several unrelated search spaces are concatenated into a single fitness landscape, creating some clear discontinuities. The amount of monotonicity in fitness landscape cross-sections is another indicator of the difficulty of the search. The larger the number of directional changes, the greater the probability of local optima, which can impact performance in many types of search techniques. Finally, another method to measure the complexity of a fitness landscape is to use fitness distance correlation, or FDC. It measures the correlation between the differences between fitness values and the distances between the underlying parameters. If a big change in the parameters corresponds to a small change in fitness, or a small change in parameters corresponds to a big change in fitness, then the correlation is small, and the search is harder. We want those two measures of change to be correlated as much as possible. In the case of preset gen, the fitness landscape is multimodal and shows a very high level of complexity when measured by any of these means. Within preset gen, the problem of the measure of the similarity between two sounds, which serve as a fitness function, is an open research problem, and we use a multi-objective function to calculate the fitness of a given preset. We use three dimensions: fast Fourier transform for the spectral and harmonic content, short fast Fourier transform for the texture and dynamics of the attack of the sound, that is a really important perceptual element, and the third dimension is a temporal envelope to make sure the temporal dynamics of the sound is right. In order to evolve those presets, we use the most popular variation of genetic algorithm for multi-objective fitness functions. It is called Non-Dominated Sorting Genetic Algorithm 2, or NSGA2, and it was proposed in 2002. When considering multiple dimensions, we say that an individual dominates another one if it is better for one or more fitness objectives without being worse for the remaining objectives. An individual is Pareto dominant if it is non-dominated, and the cumulative Pareto front includes all the Pareto dominant solutions encountered in a run across generations. The NSGA2 algorithm relies on two innovations. The first is non-dominated sorting, which classifies individuals into non-dominated fronts. The first non-dominated front is the Pareto front, and these individuals are excluded when calculating the second non-dominated front, etc. All the individuals are classified in non-dominated fronts. The second innovation is the notion of crowding distance, which favors individuals that are on the upper boundaries of a given fitness dimensions and far away from the other individuals. The crowding distance has been shown to help preserve diversity. The NSGA2 selection function simply promotes the most non-dominated fronts and breaks the last one that fits according to decreasing crowding distance. This is an elitist procedure in which all the best elements are preserved. It then simply applies tournament selection to double the population again. Ties are broken using crowding distance. In preset gen, the evolution stops when no improvement has been seen on the Pareto front for a certain number of generations. The Pareto front is then clustered in a small number of clusters, and only one individual per cluster is returned. This means that for a given target sound, several radically different presets using different sound engines can be returned by the system. Here are some examples of results. This is a recorded note of an actual piano. This is what has been evolved by preset gen for the OP1 to imitate that sound. It is hard to hear the difference. And this is a recording of a flute. And that's what was generated by preset gen. Here you can hear that the subtlety in the high treble, the high frequencies of the flute, and some of the noise associated with the flute sound cannot be captured by the synthesizer. This is a gunshot. And that's what was generated by preset gen. You can hear that despite the tremendous size of the search space, not all sounds can be approximated with equal quality. This concludes our short survey of the use of genetic algorithms for music and sound generation. We have seen how rich and powerful the idea of harnessing the creative potential of the evolutionary process is. But there are also limitations to this family of approaches. One of the main disadvantages of interactive genetic algorithm applied to music sequences is that it forms a bottleneck that slows down the system, forces small populations, and tends to cause user fatigue. If one uses an automatic fitness function, then its design is difficult. In particular, it is difficult to capture the best set of dimensions required to evolve highly fit individuals. In 1999, von Amnuasuk and Geraint-Wiggins compared a genetic algorithm and a rule-based system for the generation of chord progressions. They were using a fitness based on penalties for breaching certain musical rules. They found that the rule-based systems performed better than the genetic algorithm at style imitation. In particular, they remarked that the evolutionary operators derived from mutation and crossovers typically do not take context into account. Whether the context is encoded in an absolute or relative fashion with intervals, the mutation of a given element of the genome does not take into account its context. The evolutionary process can have a tendency to generate trivial or degenerate compositions by exploiting the weaknesses of the fitness function and cheating by optimizing fitness using means that are not musically interesting. On the other side, there are also advantages to genetic algorithm. Von Amnuasuk and Geraint-Wiggins found that the genetic algorithm was capable of producing more surprising and somewhat more novel, yet musically successful results than the rule-based system or a Markovian system. The later systems being bound to actual musical rules and/or transitions occurring in the corpus, respectively.